Great, thank you very much. So, as I said, welcome everyone. It's great to be able to talk to you today. This webinar is where I'll be sharing the work that we've been developing in Attenborough Arts Centre at the University of Leicester over the last 18 months or so to develop an exciting new scheme that places artists in academic partnerships to co-explore barriers to public engagement. This is quite a timely project to share with you as the University of Leicester is currently celebrating its centenary year and has been reviewing and developing the ways in which it engages with communities. Alongside that, many funding organisations across the arts and higher education sectors are increasingly interested in how to broker better opportunities for collaboration across the two sectors. So I'm going to be talking for up to 40 minutes, and as I said, I'd like you to keep your cameras and mics off if that's okay. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to use the chat because, as I said, my colleague is going to do their best to collate those together as we go along. So let's get started. So before I launch into the specifics of what we delivered and how through the scheme, I wanted to take a moment to explore some of the key strategic projects that I've been able to be part of that's really contributed to our approach to developing this new scheme. So I've been Public Engagement Manager now for the University of Leicester for over 5 years, and I started my role within the College of Life Sciences with the main aim of delivering culture change activity within the university using Wellcome Trust funding in order to create an environment that values and supports public engagement to be delivered to a high quality across the institution. I've therefore spent a lot of time with researchers to get to grips with how they perceive engagement and what barriers or misunderstandings there are that might hinder them from being more engaged in this kind of activity as part of their research process. We funded a range of pilot projects across a range of disciplines, and we learned quite quickly that researchers do like to engage with the arts in some way to deliver engagement activity, which is something I'll come back to in my next slide. When I started my role, I also inherited a project that was closely tied in with the new facility on campus, which is the George Davies Centre, which houses Leicester Medical School and the School of Allied Health Professionals, alongside biomedical and health research departments. The aim of this project was to develop community relationships and provide opportunities for local people to use and access that building, that new facility. So this project ran for about 4 years from 2017, and the main lesson being taken forward was how to effectively work in a community partner-led way and develop institutional facilitation of effective community engagement around health and wellbeing, which is a little bit of a shift in terms of the role of the institution, where it's not necessarily mandating what should be done or how in terms of engagement. It is simply supplying support and adding value to what is already there and known to work well within community settings. Another project I wanted to share with you is the Leicester Voices project, which we received funding from UKRI to deliver back in December 2019, which feels like a past life now, to deliver place-based community engagement with research, focusing on areas of Leicester that scored high on the index of multiple deprivation. We took this opportunity to outline a joint bid between myself in public engagement, a professor in sociology, an NHS partner involved in patient and public involvement and engagement, and the local organiser who was part of our local branch of Citizens UK, which is a community organising charity. We were able to develop, in the midst of COVID, a model of community-led listening that can not only foster equitable working relationships between people based in institutions and people based in communities, but also highlight the depth of insight that can be gathered by respecting the ways in which people in communities already engage and fitting into that rather than parachuting in cold as outsiders and therefore not really getting to grips with key issues and perspectives at play for a variety of issues and challenges. So we've learned through that building trust and respect across our diverse partners was really key to the success of that project, despite the huge challenges we faced as COVID struck over early 2020 when we were getting up and running to deliver this work. So I mentioned previously the observation that researchers quite often want to collaborate in some way with the arts to support their public engagement activity. So my background personally is a bit more sciencey than artsy. So I flagged with my peers that I found myself in a position of having to review the quality of arts-based elements of research engagement projects, and I felt that I was unaware really of how to really assess the quality of those kinds of elements. I wasn't really sure what I was meant to be looking out for, essentially. So I then asked if there was any guidance available on these types of partnerships already with the NCCPE. So that's the National Hub for developing knowledge exchange and practice guidance for higher education engagement. So people like me based in universities, basically. They said they were not aware of this existing already, and that we therefore had a great opportunity to work with them and the Wellcome Trust to co-develop some advice and guidance for practitioners to specifically support these kinds of collaborations. So we decided to use a model for co-developing guidance already tried and tested through the NCCPE called What Works. And the first step of this process is to do a bit of desk research to understand the current state of play for these types of collaborations for public engagement with research. So this is available to read on the NCCPE website if you are interested in the details. But a key finding from this work was that there are two broad ways in which these kinds of collaborations currently happen. So there's the very specific targeted engagement of particular sort of cultural groups, maybe, where the arts is used as a tool for facilitating dialogue. And then there are the kind of large footfall, large scale, broad public interest events. Say, for example, things like the Science Gallery that's hosted at King's College in London and other kinds of things like that. So quite often these kinds of activities only talk about how effectively they engaged with their target group. And they didn't really get to grips with the nature of the collaboration itself between the researcher and the artist, even though many examples of projects where these collaborations are happening did share that the collaboration itself was a key outcome. So where shared learning contributed to new ways of thinking that was beneficial to both sides. So I therefore thought that that's a fantastic opportunity for us to focus as part of developing this guidance. So we took that forward, and we really wanted to take it as an opportunity to get to the nitty-gritty details as to the kinds of environmental factors that might affect good working partnerships between academic staff and university-based staff, freelance artists and other creatives. So again, this document is available on the NCCP website, but just to kind of give you a little bit of an insight into what we've done there, we wanted to really take a person-centered approach when outlining this guide, where we unpicked, as I said, the kind of environmental factors that contribute to good working partnerships. And we highlighted some of the key issues and some of the key assumptions and barriers that can typically get in the way of effective partnership work. We took it as an opportunity to identify as well and call out the fact that the earlier an artist collaborator can be brought into a project idea and have a voice in shaping that activity, the more likely it was that a mutually beneficial and innovative approach to engagement could be deployed. So we also talk about things like timelines, appropriate pay, funding, power, time and space to build good relationships for launching into delivery, all these kinds of things as part of developing this guide. So I do hope that if you do go and look at that now, that you find it refreshingly candid as well as useful for, signposting to helpful resources and things like that. So it's not just us in Leicester that's really interested in taking forward this idea of co-creation between artists and academics. There are many other organisations interested in developing this kind of work, where a vision for higher education and cultural sector partnerships is being outlined, and some research is being undertaken to understand how it currently works. We've been able to contribute to two particular pieces. This institute, so that's the Healthcare Improvement Studies Institute, which is hosted at Cambridge. They have done some work exploring how the arts can help develop effective engagement with health research. So we've got some nice case study examples in there. And Culture Forum North did some research compiling case study examples of how arts and higher education collaborations currently take place. And we were able to share this scheme with them as a case study for that work. So we therefore have a great opportunity to be part of and inform the ways in which future collaborative partnerships can be developed through the arts and culture and higher education and research. Funders are very interested in place-based engagement. There's a variety of ways in which people from both sectors are looking at developing better opportunities for these two worlds to be brought together, particularly around health interventions, which I find really interesting. We also know that in light of huge disparities and inequalities of how COVID has impacted communities within our own country and globally, we are faced with acknowledging the deeply rooted inequalities of access, information and support for people who are the most vulnerable to harm in our society. So, as I said, there is a great opportunity to be bold in reimagining the role we have within institutions, and for those of us who aspire to make positive social change happen. And to make the most of these opportunities for new ways of thinking about and delivering meaningful and effective engagement. I'll come back to this later in my talk. So finally, I'm going to give you some details around the scheme that we've developed and how we went about it and what we learned along the way since we started it back in the summer of 2020. So as you can imagine, the timing of this work when we initiated it, we had no idea if there would be any interest at all in getting involved in additional work at this time of crisis. But we did know that we wanted to try, and we were particularly interested in the opportunity to try something new. So we wanted to be quite ambitious with piloting this scheme, but we actually kind of wanted to keep our aims quite straightforward too. So when we thought about our main aims, we decided that first and foremost, we wanted to fund interesting collaborative projects between the arts and research. We importantly wanted to create a space where the artist could come and work as a peer alongside the research staff to explore barriers to engagement. This was really important because I really wanted the scheme to be able to address what we knew was a gap in opportunities available to artists in terms of collaborating with academia. We also wanted projects to respond in some way to two core themes: racial equity in response to Black Lives Matter, and beyond ableism, to link to the work that Attenborough Arts Centre does to support access to the arts for all. So first of all, we secured funding to run the pilot from the Wellcome Trust ISSF committee within the University of Leicester. So we then drew up an expression of interest form for staff to apply to be an academic host of a creative engagement fellow. And we not only asked them to think about their project idea, but we also wanted them to outline the key people responsible for hosting the fellow and who was going to be responsible for some of the admin side, such as contracting, finance, pay, release, things like that, which we knew from previous work, for example, that which we did with the NCCPE, but also from the experiences from across the team in Attenborough Arts Centre. We knew that these kinds of difficulties can really get in the way of good collaborations. So we wanted to really minimise the potential impact of that happening as best as we could. So we were open to any art form being explored, and project ideas could spend up to £5,000 for projects to be delivered within around 4 months as part of this pilot, or that was the plan. We had a panel of people from within the Attenborough Arts Centre and the Research and Enterprise Division to review the applications we received. So we received 18 in total, which we were really blown away by. As I said, we really didn't know if we would even get one at this time because of the timing that we were trying to do this work. So we were really pleased to see quite an even spread of proposals coming in across the three major research faculties within the university, which is the College of Life Sciences, the College of Social Sciences, Arts and Humanities, and then the College of Social Science and Engineering. And we also had one from the Doctoral College, which we weren't expecting, but was actually really glad to see. And yeah, we ended up taking that project forward in the end. So just to give you a little feel for some of our assessment criteria as part of that panel, we essentially based our scoring on a handful of key factors. So how well the project addressed the two core themes, how well the project fit some of the funding priorities of the Wellcome Trust funding that was funding this pilot. So, for example, there was an aim around kind of supporting interdisciplinarity and translation and engagement of these different research areas. We also assessed it on how clear it was that the artist was being seen as a co-creator and that there was fair pay outlined in the costings of that project. And we also looked for the opportunity for the Creative Engagement Fellow to engage with different people alongside their main academic host, because we really wanted to sort of supply that kind of, experience to learn and get different perspectives. We also wanted to know whether there was a clear route for legacy around research engagement going forward. So this is where essentially we came up with these kind of key things that we thought were really important to be scoring against to identify our shortlist of projects that we could take forward. So in the end, we decided to fund 5 pilot projects, and members of the team at Attenborough Arts Centre were able to take a role in supporting the matchmaking between those academic hosts and the artists who could then take up the Creative Engagement Fellowship opportunity. And people from within the team at Attenborough were also able to sort of support them to get their collaborations actually up and running. I'm now going to give you a flavour of the 5 pilot projects that we have funded as part of the pilot. I would, however, encourage you to read the summary report as it links to different sources that were created, as well as sources that sort of inspired the kind of approach that we took. And we also have a link through to the Figshare collection that we have, which is an open access platform that the university uses. So we have a nice kind of, collection of all the project materials that are brought together for public view. So please do look at our website for information and access to all of these resources and links. But to give you a summary now of the 5 projects that we funded. The first pilot that I'll talk about matched clinical educators in Leicester Medical School to the Empathy Museum to explore the role of empathy in building better doctors. So Dr. Rachel Winter and Claire Patey were co-hosts of a series of online coffee mornings with a range of people to discuss empathy and how it could be integrated into the curriculum when training and teaching future doctors and healthcare professionals. So a colourful range of illustrations was drawn from these sessions, and there were some really exciting ways in which that work is going forward at the university, which we're aware of, but actually this is kind of news that will be coming out from the university, hopefully in the coming weeks. But I can't say more about that for now. Very mysterious, I know. The next project I'd like to talk about is we linked the Doctoral College, who was a surprise application, as I said, who look after the PhD students in the university and some of the master's research students, with writer and performer Paula Varjak to explore and capture students' experiences of mental health in order to build better strategies of communication and engagement, particularly with students who feel otherwise marginalised within our institutional context. So a really powerful interactive audio resource was created as part of that, and it beautifully demonstrates the gap between how staff and students talk about key issues such as race that influences experiences of ill mental health, and sometimes the adds to the feeling that maybe students don't always feel comfortable with who they can speak to about some of the issues because of a potential lack of understanding about what those experiences are really like. So next slide, please. Thank you very much. So The next project I'll share is we were able to match local theatre company Physical with a clinical academic who runs a dementia care clinic in Leicester to explore cultural threads that could be used, particularly with South Asian elderly patients and their families, to try and explain the impact of ongoing disease progression on the care needs of patients coming into the clinic. The partnership explored storytelling and other cultural elements that could be brought into the clinic to help develop connections between patients and the clinician. The next project I'll talk about, this is me, a professor in psychology whose research was focused on identity, was interested in exploring with writer and theatre maker Angela Clerkin a series of workshops that explored creatively the theme of identity and included an exercise that John had developed from his research. It led to the creation of a booklet capturing the writing of women and non-binary students and staff, and inspired Professor Maltby, John Maltby, to look at how future engagement could aim to foster more meaningful interactions with people that were a bit more creative in nature. And we also learned from this project in particular how engagement activities that are really considerate of building compassionate spaces can have a positive impact on well-being for all involved. And that's something that we're really interested in, sort of creating a bit more of a framework for assessment around, you know, how we capture impact of engagement activities that we might do in the future. So last but not least, we teamed an academic in museum studies with visual artist Emmy Alray to identify effective pathways to growing inclusive institutional cultures in museums. The collaboration itself resulted in new relationships for future research and the design of a shared online space to support greater sector engagement within racial theory research while exploring new concepts within practice. So hopefully that has given you a nice insight into some of our projects. But as I said, please do go and read the summary report and the materials that are available that were created as part of those to get a much better insight into what those projects tried to do and how they did it. So all in all, this is what our timeline looks like for this pilot. Once projects got started, we saw quite quickly that the timelines were spreading, and we took the decision to be as flexible as we could in terms of the timeline, because ultimately what I was really interested in seeing is whether we could create really great opportunities for mutually beneficial partnership working to be built in between the host and the creative fellow. And if that meant being as generous as we could in terms of the time we could give people to explore things together whilst they were juggling other commitments and still being in the midst of COVID, then for me, that was worth it. The downside, though, is that I had wanted to see if we could build in some opportunities for the projects to cross over in some way, maybe bring everyone together for a sharing event of sorts and things like that, do a bit of joined up training. But in the end, that ended up being quite impractical, as the projects could be at very, very different stages. And I think, you know, there was a point in which, you know, there was a project that had finished and there was, you know, a final project that kind of was still waiting to actually get sort of started. So as much as we weren't quite able to build this in for this first phase, we're very aware of the fact that, you know, we'd really like to see this integrated into phase 2. So to summarise now some of our main outputs of phase 1, I've already mentioned most of these, but just to kind of pull it all together again. We have a range of materials and insights that we've learned and gathered as part of this pilot phase, and that will go into informing the next phase of this scheme, which I'll use the next couple of slides to kind of break down a little bit more. We also wanted to see if we could put into practice the things that we had learned from the guidance document that we developed from the NCCPE, and I feel like what we've been able to do with this scheme really does offer something that isn't quite necessarily there otherwise, in terms of that kind of much deeper opportunity to work as a peer, as a co-creator for artists with academic staff and people within universities and researchers and students and etc. So as I said, we've collated together all of our learning within a summary report, and collated together all the project materials within a Figshare collection, which is open to the public, which you can access both through the Attenborough Arts Centre webpage on Creative Engagement Fellowships and within that summary report itself. So you've got multiple ways in which to access those things. We have secured funding to deliver phase 2, which will start over the course of this year. I don't have any specific details about phase 2 at this time. And all I can tell you is that if you are interested in being involved in this phase, the best thing to do is to look out for further information via the Attenborough Arts Centre website and socials. So apologies, the next couple of slides are going to be a bit wordy, but I really wanted to kind of distill down some of the key learnings that we want to take forward and what the opportunities look like for phase 2. And apologies, I appreciate that it might be a bit frustrating that we don't have more details about phase 2 at the moment, but hopefully this is still helpful. So we were quite naive in hindsight, I think it's fair to say, to think that we could set up a handful of new partners to deliver projects within about 4 months. That is even knowing what we knew about, setting up new partnerships, that, these things take time. But I suppose naively, we thought we could do a little pilot project and just kind of test some principles and see how that worked. Now, obviously, in the context of the time at which we were trying to do this work, that was maybe a bit silly. And as I said, we actually took the decision anyway to make it much more important and prioritize the fact that we wanted to create really good working collaborations between the people and be really supportive in that sense, than say to kind of really push for, certain deadlines and certain kinds of outputs, because it just really wasn't the purpose of the scheme and what we were trying to test out here. So we do need to consider that, obviously, as part of phase 2, that we have a bit more of a realistic timeline in place for how we will deliver the range of activities we might want to integrate into that phase 2. We noticed that projects that had support to guide them along, or more support than maybe other areas, other projects, were more likely to complete earlier and had a bit more clarity over what they were trying to achieve together. So I think that reflects the need to have dedicated support to facilitate new partnerships and new ways of working, especially when you are trying to match up people who may have to juggle multiple roles or commitments and are potentially quite time poor. So that was a really important sort of learning point to take forward, I think, in future phases of this scheme. We have an opportunity to think more creatively about how we capture and evaluate what we're trying to do through this scheme. So as this was a pilot project, we weren't necessarily sure of exactly the kinds of ways in which we might be able to do this effectively. But we do have some interesting opportunities that I'll go into in the next slide that hopefully will help strengthen that element of what we're trying to achieve through this scheme. I mentioned before that, sorry, go back. So I mentioned before that it was really important to me that when we brought artists into these collaborative partnerships, that there wasn't the assumption made that their job was to create an artistic output. It was really important to make sure that the artist felt that they could go into that partnership as an equal to the academic host and be seen as an equal partner with a different range of expertise that was, just as important to bring into the thinking around engagement as was coming from the academic host. However, on reflection, some people reported back to us that the openness around what was expected of them as part of their fellowship might have been a bit too open. And I think some people maybe felt that they therefore kind of wasn't sure what was expected of them, which obviously after having some conversations and some reassurances, it ends up being fine. But just that kind of initial sort of, getting to grips with the project and what they were being asked to do, I think we could have been a bit clearer about what we were expecting as part of the scheme. So as I've said there, it might have been just a bit too open for some. We have an opportunity to start standardizing and almost kind of, more formalizing, some of the things and processes behind what we're actually doing here. So, for example, for this scheme and the future phases, standardize things like, the contracting, the kinds of consent or other kinds of materials that projects might need to sort of have in place if they want to do participatory work with people, for example. So we have an opportunity again to sort of reflect on, okay, what are some key documents and key templates that we might be able to outline to help people along the way when they're planning and organising their own activities as part of the fellowship. And it might be helpful as well to have a bit of a clearer view as to what budget is there to cover the time of the creative fellow and what budget is there to cover any materials and things like that. Again, what we did is we kept it quite open. We said that there was £5,000 available per fellowship. I do now think that it might have been more helpful to have, say, here's the budget available to cover the cost of the creative fellows' time, which we expect to sort of be at appropriate levels of pay. And, you know, we can refer people to places and resources like the Artists Union for outlining that. And it might be better to then sort of say, have, you know, a separate small ring-fenced amount of money to go alongside that. And we can say, you know, you also have the opportunity to bid for top-up funding to do some extra bits of material development and delivery of certain things. So that's, again, some feedback that we've got. So the opportunities for phase 2. So it's really exciting, you know, being able to do something so new and different through this kind of scheme. It's something that I've had, you know, the real privilege of being able to do with the role that I have and with the help of the Wellcome Trust funding that we can use to spur on some of this activity. So what we've reflected on and what we see as, you know, the best opportunities to sort of explore specifically for phase 2 of this scheme is that when we initially started out, we weren't very clear or focused on what the main purpose of the scheme was. As I said, you know, we wanted to kind of do a little bit of everything, where we wanted to respond to some key themes of stuff that we knew was really important for and hindering for engagement, still equitable engagement. We wanted to fund really interesting arts research collaborations, and we wanted to see if we could, you know, help create opportunities for really high quality and innovative engagement projects. But we also were interested in seeing, okay, you know, can we successfully create a space whereby the artist and the academic host are peers and feel mutually respected, and all of these kinds of things that address some of the key issues that we identified as hindering sometimes, you know, successful collaborations that might be happening elsewhere or more typically. So we therefore think that there's a great opportunity specifically to, you know, acknowledge, I suppose, the role in Attenborough Arts Centre in delivering and administering this kind of scheme, that we focus it as a really high quality skills and knowledge exchange opportunity for developing artists and early career researchers. So we have this great chance to sort of really focus on who we want to be part of this scheme going forward, so that they can benefit from this skills and training opportunity, essentially, that might sort of give them a really good step in their next kind of career move, or whatever it is that they might be developing next in their work or in their practice. As I said, you know, we've learned the tricky way that we should probably be quite more realistic with our timelines for these things, and, you know, remember time and time again that new partnerships take time to develop before you can deliver things. It's a lesson that we all have to keep learning, I think. I know I do, even though I tell other people to do it. As I said, you know, we recognise that there could have been more done in terms of that consistency in support and materials provided for all the projects, but that's something that we can potentially build in for the next phase. And we also want to sort of make the most of the fact that we've got this really interesting cohort that we can build through the scheme, and therefore build in networking, training, things like that, and to really help that kind of cross-pollination of ideas and learnings and skills and experiences across this kind of lovely mix of people that would be, you know, joined by this scheme. We also have really exciting opportunities to partner with 2 new institutes that are being developed through the university, and that's the Institute for Digital Culture and the Institute for Inclusive Higher Education. So I've been having some really fantastic conversations with both my colleagues in the Attenborough Arts Centre and people leading on the development of these institutes to really build in that and strengthen the academic partnership that can be in place to then deliver this scheme and support the evaluation and things like that. So we might also be able to sort of, through that partnership, create some different themes that we want those projects and proposals to respond to. And that's because we know that, you know, for beyond COVID, we know that there will still absolutely be an interest in creating effective online spaces for engagement, and how digital tools and digital access and provision can really enhance engagement within the arts and culture sector, as well as within higher education and research. And then we also have this great opportunity to look at how can we build a really effective framework to understand how to evaluate how we're improving or addressing issues around equality of access and engagement opportunities through these projects. So I really very much looking forward to seeing how that partnership can sort of really come into play for the next phase as well. So my final slide, my final point, if you like, to sort of wrap up our webinar, is that going back to this point that I made earlier about, you know, we have this really great opportunity to reimagine the role of institutions, to reimagine the purpose of engagement. And I think it's fair to say that at the moment, many public institutions are looking at how they can do better to broker connections for deliberative engagement around big issues. The University of Leicester has a focus on citizenship as part of its strategy, and as I mentioned, it's currently celebrating its centenary, and it's taking that as an opportunity to improve and review community engagement. Many universities, including our own and De Montfort University, are developing something called civic university agreements to improve the ways in which universities work together to address issues within communities and develop better institutional partnerships in a way that's more place-based and local. Alongside that, on the other side, we have Arts Council England, who have recently released a new 10-year strategy called Let's Create. And something that's really key within that strategy is the intention to build more inclusive and relevant arts and culture organisations that serve and reflect our diverse communities. All in all, there continues to be an openness to exploring and developing new ways of working and fostering collaborations across sectors and partners. And I think, again, just to say that I think it truly is a genuinely great opportunity to be bold and creative and really sort of put into practice, you know, different ways in which we can learn from each other, bring people together and make positive change. And I do really firmly believe that there is something very, very powerful about bringing together arts and culture, research capabilities and evidence and community-led participation. So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to stop there. I've got some time as part of this session to answer any questions that you might have. So if I could just ask my colleague Alistair to let me know if there's been any particular questions, or if not, if anyone has a burning question that they want to ask, you know, you've got the chance now to use the chat.
There haven't been any questions yet, Marie.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So as I said, I'm very happy to take questions now. I'll give you a minute to think about it. Otherwise, we have recorded this webinar. I do plan to make this available alongside all of our other materials, which, as I said, you can access through the Attenborough Arts Centre website if you search Creative Engagement Fellowships. And we also have on the Attenborough website, there's a way in which you can submit queries to the Arts Centre. So I'll take this opportunity to stop and thank you all very much for listening. And yeah, hopefully you found that useful. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I can see there's a hand, Andrew.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Marie. And I first of all want to congratulate you on this sort of the time and investment of your energies that you put into developing this at Leicester for the last 5 years. It's been a remarkable progress that we've seen. I mean, I guess there's one of the challenges that still remains, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on how we can sort of collectively overcome this, is in terms of recognition and reward for those who invest their time and effort in this. I mean, I can clearly see sort of higher level desire now to engage with civic communities, and people can I guess people can be recognised in terms of sort of included within sort of award schemes, but I think still people feel reluctant that it's not really something that is something that when they're busy with their sort of core activities of teaching and research as an academic, you know, it's time that they really have the time to do this. So it's about making sure that that is recognised and appropriately rewarded. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And it's a really pertinent point, because I think in the things that I've learned, you know, from working on this now for the last 5 years, I think it's fair to say that there is, at various levels, a bit of a kind of undervaluing of different kinds of expertise, experience and knowledge that's developed and gained outside of traditional institutional settings. And when you then therefore have people coming into institutions like with my role, and the purpose is to try and broker sort of links to raise the voices of some people and almost kind of, you know, have an openness between people who normally hold a bit of power and decision making within certain settings, I think it's about sort of, you know, properly providing infrastructure and roles dedicated at the institutional level. I think that there are ways in which funding doesn't always help with this. So I was actually delivering some training end of last week, where we talked about the reality of how public engagement activity is funded currently within the higher education and research sector. And quite often, you know, we're kind of trying to talk about the importance of building long-term equitable partnerships, which take time to foster real understanding, to then be productive. And in reality, the short-termedness of the funding and the roles that are in place to facilitate these things. And actually, we know by now, you know, there's been specific investment, you know, in the sector to be able to develop public engagement activity. As you know, the organisation, for example, the NCCPE, you know, is been established for about 12 years now, with the purpose of doing that coordinating role and knowledge exchange role. So we know that there's a lot of issues, almost structurally, you know, across the sector, that actively hinder opportunities for these kinds of ways of working and open explorations and relationship building to kind of really come into play. What I do see as a great opportunity, though, is the conversation that's happening now around research culture. So as you know, we've been doing some interesting work within our university to use the Wellcome Trust toolkits that aim to create a space for people to talk about some of the key issues within research culture. And they bring in a variety of issues. But I really do believe that, you know, our progress within public engagement and partnership working and relationship building and all those kinds of values that are really important but take time and go unnoticed and undervalued, they really butt heads with the kind of the issues that are within research culture more broadly. So, you know, we have issues like, you know, there's a high competitiveness and high rate of outputs and particular types of outputs that are prioritised over, say, you know, like I said, a bit more of the invisible work, but really important work that goes into building really good partnerships for that kind of co-creation, collective intelligence kind of stuff. So I'm sorry, I've given you a very long answer to that question, but I do think that is... That's how I see it.
Absolutely right. I think maybe also one thing to say is that we need to perhaps move away from thinking about what does it do for me, and appreciate that actually, although we may not be what we're sort of short-term sort of seeking, it is definitely benefited the organization as a whole enormously. And so the reward is perhaps not so personal sometimes as actually the sort of recognizing that it has been extremely valuable to the institution as a whole. I think you're right, we are getting better at Leicester and other institutions at recognizing the importance of this, and many individuals have contributed to that, even if they're not sort of named and picked out individually. But I think it's been an incredibly valuable effort, and we need to see the reward in terms of the way that it has changed research culture much more broadly.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, just to kind of extra highlight something you said there, you know, the role of the institutions. So, you know, I think there's a really interesting shift happening where public institutions are realizing, better late than never, that they maybe can't quite keep up with how social and cultural issues and challenges and preferences are evolving, you know, within broader society, and what that really looks like for people, and the kinds of things that they are in a position of knowing, you know, being the knowledge holders or, you know, the experts in. And so I think we've got this really interesting opportunity to sort of almost reimagine the role of public institutions, where it moves away from, you know, maybe taking the role of being the expert and the knowledge holder and the decision maker for all things, but actually take more of that role of being a broker, of bringing together different kinds of expertise and different people who will be impacted or have, you know, a variety of experiences that can shed a bit more of a well-rounded perspective on what the actual challenges are that we're talking about. So, you know, when we're talking about big issues at play right now, you know, things like climate change and refugee crisis and all sorts of other things. I mean, we're sport for choice for, you know, challenges, aren't we? You know, let's face it. You know, I think there really needs to be that shift in the role of the institution, where it's not about the institution being able to make decisions on behalf of others. It's having that role of facilitating the deliberation of that and bringing the right people around the table to sort of make that a much more democratic process.
Yeah,
so,
and I think that is definitely happening, and this has been part of the move towards that, the encouragement towards that.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your questions, Andrew. And yeah, I don't think I saw any other. Let's see. So
just loads of compliments.
Oh, great. Great. Okay. Well, in that case, I will leave it there. Thank you all so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure to sort of have the opportunity to reflect on the work that's led up to us being able to imagine and then actually deliver this exciting new scheme. So thank you all again very much for joining me, and I hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, Marie.